I don't sleep anymore. Earlier this week on Sunday night, I had a dream in which I knew I was asleep. I was stood outside of my house in torrential rain at night, and I thought I needed to get inside in order to wake up. I approached the front door and placed my knuckles under the door window, ready to knock. I knew that my next action would bring me one step closer to consciousness. The moment I knocked on the door, the thudding sound of the knock was so loud, so frightening, and so real that it woke me up from my sleep. I jumped immediately and listened out for a further knock at the door. I was roasting hot, sweating profusely, and my heart was beating so hard. I don't think I would have been able to tell the difference between a knock at the door and my thudding heartbeat. After I came to my senses and realized that the possibility of the door knocking at the exact moment of dreaming, it is incredibly low, I fell back to sleep. Monday, the very following night, I had the same dream. Right back outside the front of the house in the pouring rain again, intensely staring at the house. I slowly walked to the front door. This time, it was open. I walked in and went straight into the kitchen. I opened the cutlery drawer and pulled out the largest meat knife I have. I looked into my reflection through the blade of the knife. If you stare directly into the reflection of your eyes for long enough, eventually it will hit you that someone is looking at you. If you know it's your reflection, but just for a second, you forget and become self-conscious, as if it's somebody else behind your reflection's eyes. I didn't take a second of looking at my reflection through the blade to realize that somebody else was looking back. The moment I realized it was somebody else wearing my grin in the reflection, I slammed the cutlery drawer shut. Again, I shot up out of bed. The sound of metal clanging in the drawers that had abruptly closed was so defined and so crystal clear, it couldn't have been a dream. Really spooked this time, I went downstairs into the kitchen. I was half asleep and had to check. I opened the cutlery drawer, and I was relieved to find the knife still in the drawer. I closed it and went back to bed. It took a little longer this time, but I fell asleep. Tuesday night, my dream started with that grin in the reflection. From the look in his eyes, I could tell that the man in the reflection knew he was looking back at someone confused and scared. I found myself looking to the reflection of the knife, already in my hand, while I stood outside of my house in the rain. The front door was open again. I walked into the house directly up the stairs and into my bedroom. I looked at the bed and saw someone sleeping in it. It was me. I knew what I was going to do, but also knew that I couldn't stop myself. Instead, I kept thinking over and over again, "Wake up!" My emotions were both in two extremes at once. I was terrified, but at the same time I was thrilled and excited to kill. Wake up! I shot out of bed and stood up. I was absolutely drenched in sweat, roasting hot, but relieved to find nobody stood in front of me with a knife. It took a few seconds to realize that I was gripping something tight in my hand. I knew what it was, even before I looked down at it and saw my reflection in it. It was the meat knife, and this time the reflection in it looked terrified. I don't sleep anymore. The tattoo. You wake after a wild night of partying to find that while you were wasted, for some reason, you had a crude smiley face tattooed on your foot. You write it off as a lesson to never drink that much again. The next time you wake, however, you discover the face is now on your ankle, and it's not as crudely drawn. The day after that, it's on your lower leg, and it's starting to look more and more like a drawing of a real face. As it continues to move up day after day and become more realistic looking, you wonder what happens when it reaches your own face. In the kitchen, a young girl is playing in her bedroom when she hears her mother call to her from the kitchen. So she runs downstairs to meet her mother. As she's running through the hallway, the door to the cupboard under the stairs opens, and a hand reaches out and pulls her in. It's her mother. She whispers to her child, "Don't go into the kitchen. I heard it too." How this ends. There were parties that night, but I elected to spend it alone, drinking and snorting the last of my priceless heroin on a wooden bluff overlooking the sea, capturing what quiet I could on my own terms, and determined to meet the last day sober. I woke, caked in vomit and pain as the sun arose and trickled down onto the beach, relishing the cool salt breeze on my chapped face. As I plunged my face into the water, I heard a tiny wail of joy and turned in mute disbelief. A child raced down the beach, trailed by her mother. As public opinions had slid into open hatred of those who knowingly reproduced, births had become unheard of. I swam in a wash of emotions. Raw fury that manifests selfishness, and aching, nameless joy, 1,000 other twinges of head and heart. In the last decade, when it was clear that nothing could divert the comet's path, the final gasps of propaganda's engine had repeated this final message. Don't make it worse. I rose, fists balled, but my shout of indignant protest died on my lips. The earth trembled, a passing shockwave underfoot. The impact was hours ago in the steppes of Asia. The wall of fire and pressure had made its solemn journey around the world, to us. The girl was swept into her mother's arms. They looked serenely at me. Twin eyes of sea green. For a moment I bordered epiphany. Guilt washed in behind the tide of anger. Then it was gone, and I was empty at last. "I love you," whispered the mother, holding the child close. I sighed, and the air grew dim and thick with the onrush of steam. My vision clouded, and I turned to the sea one final time.